Okay, this is Robert Kirkbride, and he was born on July 26, 1941. He served during the Vietnam War in the Navy, and his highest rank achieved was Petty Officer Second Class. And this interview is taking place in Alto, Michigan. I'm Dylan McAllister, and he is my grandfather. And videotaping is my mom, Kirsten McAllister. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Okay, so to start out, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born July 26, 1941, as you correctly point out,
Yeah.
in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I was raised in a small town nearby in Climax, Michigan, where I grew up my formative years and went to high school.
Where'd you go to high school?
High school was at Climax, Michigan.
Um,
It was a small town. It was a great place to grow up. It was after World War II and before the Korean War, and certainly before the Vietnam War, and had a lot of friends, was able to play in a number of sports and enjoyed myself.
what were your parents' occupations?
My dad was a factory worker, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom, which is the way it was in those days for most people.
And how many siblings did you have?
I had one brother and two sisters. An older brother and my two younger sisters.
And before ending the service, what were you doing?
Well, after high school, I attended college and had gotten a degree from Central Michigan University. Upon graduation, the Vietnam War was heating up, and as most of my generation, we were eligible for a military draft, which doesn't exist anymore. And I was declared to be physically fit and classified 1A, which means that I was eligible for being drafted. And so at that time, there was a big buildup in Vietnam. We had entered the war just a couple of years earlier, and when the North Vietnamese invaded South Vietnam, the then President, Lyndon Johnson, began increasing the numbers of people per month that were drafted. I was unfortunately selected in September of 1965, shortly after I accepted my first job with the Michigan Department of Transportation. So with that in mind, they had said I had 7 days to report for basic training, but I investigated my other options and discovered that I could also enlist on a deferred basis, so I could gain status with the department, so I would have hiring rights once I completed my service. So I chose the Navy over that, so that's how I got there. And I entered the Navy in April of 1966.
Did you have any other family members who also served?
Not immediate families, but I did have three uncles that served in World War II, one of which who was wounded as an infantryman in the Philippines, but he did survive. And I had another uncle that served in the South Pacific in the Navy, and was there at the end of World War II. He was particularly remembers the naval battle around Okinawa, which was a Japanese island. My third uncle was in the Merchant Marine, and he did 5 transatlantic voyages delivering goods to England to fight the war there, and then was incredibly at the first landing at Normandy and D-Day, and subsequently made 13 trips to Normandy, first of all delivering troops, and lastly delivering materials and stuff like that. So he had a very illustrious naval career. And those guys influenced my choice to a great deal.
You have a friend.
Come on, dude.
Aren't you going to recognize the impromptu guest?
What specialized training did you go through for the Navy?
Yeah, I went to boot camp at Great Lakes, Illinois. 10 weeks of misery for the most part. Except because I was a college graduate, I got to be head of a company, a recruit, chief petty officer, they called me. So I had relatively easy duty there. Then I went to Bainbridge, Maryland for training, administrative training. And then from there I was assigned to Commander Training Command, U.S. Atlantic Fleet in Norfolk, Virginia, where I became an assistant to the command's educational advisor. In that capacity, I had some pretty interesting work. Foremost among that was I developed instructional program materials to train crew aboard ships on how to fight fires and damage control in the event of attack or some sort of catastrophe. So that's what I recall specifically. From then, I was assigned to Fleet Air Keflavik, Iceland, where I reported directly to the admiral in charge. And so these were my two commands while I was in the Navy, neither of which had anything to do with Vietnam, which I guess I was fortunate because in particular, a good friend of mine who did the same sort of work I did, he got his orders shortly after I did. He became a gunner on a riverboat in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. Contracted multiple sclerosis because of his exposure to chemicals that we used against the enemy, and now is a total invalid in a wheelchair and probably won't live much longer as a direct result of that. But he operated a typewriter as I did, and I ended up continuing on in that capacity sort of in Iceland. He ended up shooting machine guns in Vietnam. It's something I've sort of debated all the rest of my life, Could have been,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that aside, in Iceland, my job was to, basically it's called in the Navy an admiral's writer. I became secretary to an admiral. And some of my duties, I was in charge of officer records and things of a classified nature that I can't really discuss with you.
So how did you adapt to the military life, like through food, social life, and barracks? How did you adapt to that?
Well, I was older than most as a college graduate, so it was fairly easy for me to do it. As I say in boot camp, Navy is not like the Army where you're doing hikes, crawling through mud, learning to rifle shoot. There, the Navy learns how to tie knots, swim, march, and do push-ups. That's about it for boot camp. Barracks life, never really adapted to it. For the most part, I didn't sleep much in the barracks because of everybody else making a lot of different noises while they slept. But then again, when I was in Virginia, I married your grandmother. So I lived off base with her on a fairly normal basis, and she was a school teacher in a local middle school. And so we lived pretty normally, and I just go to work every day and occasionally do military kinds of things like standing watch or things like that. In Iceland, I was in the barracks again, but we lived in an old Air Force barracks on base where I only had one roommate. So we basically had our private room. So that was pretty easy too. So again, I was lucky. Aboard ship, which incidentally I never was on, which is highly unusual for anybody in the Navy. You're sleeping in hammocks really close together, people above you, people below you, that sort of thing. I never got to experience any of that.
Okay. What details of the trip abroad do you have? I kind of need more details about.
Well, Iceland is one of the most unusual places in the world. In the summer, it's constant sunlight. In the winter, it's nearly constant darkness. And I spent 2 winters there. In our room, to keep the light out in the summer, we put aluminum foil over the window so it was always dark. In the wintertime, it didn't make any difference. So it's just totally always dark in the rooms. We just turn on the lights, and that's the way we lived in there. Didn't get off base much because Iceland wasn't really that friendly to American personnel at the time, and you basically had to get a pass 10 days in advance of when you wanted to go off. So that sort of, cut down on the number of times you got to go off base. However, I did go off base on occasion, and it's a lovely yet different country. There's no trees, there's no grass, just lava covered with moss and a bunch of sheep running around, and with the wind constantly blowing. But I was also fortunate. I got one trip back to Norfolk, where my wife remained when I got transferred there. Spent a long weekend. She came up during the summer, and I was able to arrange a vacation, and we spent a couple of years in Germany and the Netherlands and Switzerland and Austria. So that was fun. So in summary, that was if you had to do military duty, that was fine. I should point out the difference between Iceland and, say, a place like Vietnam. Of course, we were at war in Vietnam, but we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union at that time too, and that was rooted the function of Keflavik, Fleet Air Keflavik. We maintained a fleet of highly capable aircraft whose duty was to fly and identify Soviet submarines in the North Atlantic via means that I probably shouldn't discuss. But anyway, we and our sister command in the Azores flew patterns in the North Atlantic to identify and monitor Soviet submarine traffic, as well as any surface craft that the Soviets might have going on. And so I did participate in one spring exercise where the U.S. and the Canadians collectively, we had spotted the Soviets moving, and so we threw all of our aircraft out there, and we were busy for 48, 72 hours gathering all of the information that we needed to get. So that was an interesting experience on my part to participate in that.
So did you form any friendships while you were serving?
Well, the one person I spoke of that went to Vietnam and became a good friend and remains such. From Iceland, I can't say that I really developed any lasting friendships. So a fellow by the name of Mike Potter, I suppose, would be one. Oh, and Mike Arbogast. He he got transferred to London from Iceland, and I had an opportunity one Thanksgiving to fly to London and to meet up with him and explore the city there. That was fun. We've not kept in contact. In Virginia, probably haven't seen them since the Navy, other than Mike Seidel, the fellow I talked about, that's disabled now. But there were half a dozen of us that went out together and had a lot of fun and good times.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
Well, certainly not by cell phone or texting or things like that, because that didn't exist. Letters, cassette tape recordings. That's what we did a lot, because when I was in Iceland, because of my position in the command, I had access to occasionally a use of the classified phone system back to the States, where I would be able to use that no cost, and then pay a fee for whatever. I can't remember where we connected, but then the connection charge to Norfolk, where my wife was. So did that, and had one occasion to call home. So that was the other way. Otherwise, we were pretty isolated. We had no TV. The only radio station we could get was the BBC out of England. We did that via shortwave. So it was sort of isolated duty, but not too bad.
Did you do any recreation or off-duty pursuits while you were serving? Like, what did you do off-duty?
Well, I learned to play handball, and got reasonably good at it. At least I thought I had. Until this guy and I took on one of the officers in the command, and he whooped us 2 against 1 and took us out. We thought we were pretty good. We went hunting in the Blue Ridge Mountains, which was fun. A lot of historic sites in Virginia, and I went there. When I was in Iceland, I took a ski trip to Akureyri, which is very near the Arctic Circle, one winter, and that was a lot of fun. Met a lot of Icelandic people on that trip. And the summer that my wife was up there, your grandmother, we took a 4th of July weekend to a place called Vestmannaeyjar. It was Jaime in the Vestmannaeyjar Islands, which is south of Iceland, where we spent an interesting long weekend in an artist colony, and it was a haven for a lot of seabirds, things like that. And we took a very memorable boat trip to a newly formed volcanic island. You'll have to ask your grandmother about that sometime, but she remembers that very well. And I did, other sporting activities. I was there, lots of movies, long nights in Iceland. Northern Lights, just beautiful.
Oh, you can see them from up there.
Oh yeah, where we are, almost as far north as you can get. So, they just snap around the sky, and that was really cool.
So where were you when the war was ended?
I was out of the Navy. I think officially the Vietnam War ended in 1975. I was discharged in 1970.
Oh, okay.
But there's a lot of war yet to be fought before they finally reached terms for a peace there.
So how did you return home after your service was over?
Airplane. From Keflavik to Philadelphia. And they delayed me in Philadelphia much longer than I wanted, but I was mustered out of the Navy in Philadelphia.
How was your readjustment to civilian life?
I was always a civilian. I was never in the military for the long haul. I did it because it was the honorable thing for me to do. You need to know that during Vietnam, prior to my going, that there was major student protesting in the United States, including burning of draft cards, going to Canada. It was a very unpopular war, and I knew that. But primarily because of the service of my uncles in World War II, I couldn't dishonor them. So that's why I went in. I thought the war, in retrospect, was a war we shouldn't have been in, and I think that many people who were in power at the time would agree with me today. So I did my duty. I did it honorably, and there are many good things I remember about it. But everybody would have to make their own choices. Should we ever encounter another conflict like that, what they would do.
So, what life lessons have you learned from the service?
Well, it's hard to say. My values and lessons learned were pretty much established prior to my going in. I had graduated college. I had secured a professional job, and then circumstances being what they were, I gave up nearly 4 years of my life serving my country. Life's lessons, it's difficult to say. Well, you got to be honest and true and fair. But then again, I was never in a combat situation, nor did I go to sea. So my view certainly would be different than other people who had served in combat or had gone to sea.
Okay, so is there anything else you'd like to add about your service or anything?
My service was a piece of cake compared to most. I freely admit that. I lived normally in Virginia for the most part. I met dozens of admirals, and admirals are really nice people. But first lieutenants or lieutenants in the Navy, they're in my view weren't very nice people because they were very aggressive. They were trying to prove themselves. They were trying to move ahead, and I'm sure that once they made their next level, became more decent human beings. It was a temporary thing on their part. On the other hand, I had a lot of officer friends that I socialized with outside of regular hours that are really great people. But I strayed. The question was again?
Just anything else you'd like to add about the war, about your service?
No, I'd probably do it again. Although there were options in those days, as I've said, going to Canada or whatever. But I performed an essential function. I'm proud of what I did, and I think I served my country well.
Good. Okay, thank you for your time. 8 minutes.